Lepo pozdravljeni in dobrodošli. Moje ime je Janez Gruden. Današnji spletni dogodek nosi naslov Upravljanje z varnostjo oziroma angleško Manage Detection and Response. V podjetju SRC se zavedamo te procesne in vsebinske kompleksnosti tematike, zato se storitev operativnih centrov lotevamo v sodelovanju z uveljavljenim partnerjem iz Danske z imenom CSIS. Simon Simčič, arhitekt IT storitev, in Kristjan Jakobsen, strokovnjak za varnost v podjetju CSIS, sta torej današnja govorca na temo zaznave in odkrivanja anomalij ter seveda ukrepov za odpravo ranljivosti. Konkretneje, zakaj stranke potrebujejo storitev upravljanja z varnostjo, potek izvajanja storitev, zaznava in odprava groženj ter seveda nekaj primerov reševanja incidentov. Hello to everybody. I'm not going to translate this introductory part to English, as it is a technical webinar, not Eurovision contest. So rather would give control over the web to Mr. Simon Simčič and Kristjan Jakobsen. The subject is Managed Detection and Response Services. So in short, why would customer need to apply managed detection security services on top of a load of other security solutions, service framework, tools, and some processes. And at the end, use case or two with a story how incidents are handled and properly responded to. So gentlemen, the web or the stage is yours.
Thank you, Janez, for the introduction. Good morning. My name is Simon Simčič. I am with SRC for the last 10 years, and I'm an IT architect, and I will be presenting the SRC SOC along with Managed Detection and Response Services and how we handle it in SRC. So the Security Operations Center, as we see it, because it has many definitions, is an organizational unit that handles threat detection, security, finds security incidents, and helps to manage and coordinate a response to these incidents. And resulting from that, we see the following crucial capabilities that a SOC must have to perform its tasks well, to be effective. So one is real-time monitoring and triage of incidents. The other is analysis of these incidents, responding to them, and coordinating response. Then we have the gathering and analysis of cyber intelligence, so information on new vulnerabilities, information on new threats that come up daily, and what kind of, and it also needs to have some overview into what is deployed in an environment to realize what is basically relevant with regards to new vulnerabilities and regards to new threats. So, then we have the tuning and maintenance of sensors. We see sensors as everything generating events for the SOC. So we have several, we will be going through the list, a short list, and development of engineering of tools that it needs. One of the things that we have developed in SRC is a portal that lists, that aggregates vulnerabilities and maps to existing environment without scanning for them. It's not a vulnerability scanner, it's basically an aggregator with some mapping to your environment or to the customer's environment. So to go on with crucial tools that we need, we see SIM as the centerpiece of a SOC because it collects, correlates, and aggregates events from the entire environment, providing a single pane of glass look over the events in an environment. It does protection, detection and protection from known threats, and through the single pane of glass argument, it builds context and gives insight into the events in an environment. And because it does this job so well, it is also called a force multiplier. This is resulting from the fact that normal environments generate tens of millions of events each day, and you would need, I would say, around 50 analysts to analyze this by hand. But if you have a SIM, you need less analysts, and you are very much more effective with a much lower number of analysts. And we use sensors, different sensors, to provide good data to SIM, because SIM is as good as the data as it gets. We have IPS as one of the strong sources of events, next generation firewalls that can look and differentiate between applications, and network analysis devices that, let's say, passively monitor events on a network. We see ADCs as also a strong source of information for an environment, because it looks into events that happen to our applications. And also when servers, here we mean operating systems that are on servers, because monitoring authentication events on servers is very important in this day and age for any type of malicious activity. And last but not least are procedures. What to do once you find something, because you need to, let's say, have an escalation plan on how you will deal with incidents that occur. And people need to know what they will do when something happens, because otherwise it's just alerts that nobody reacts to. And we see several key challenges for customers. What do SRC and CSIS bring to the table? We have customers face lack of staff, usually lack of expertise. Then they are usually it's very usual that they are much too busy with operating tasks like keeping the lights on. This we mean tending to their environment, and where the care for security is not in the first place, but it usually is behind, because we have to keep the environment up. It's sometimes more important than doing the backend stuff. Then it's regulatory demands. This is also a large challenge for many of our customers, because the regulation has become very strict in the last 2 years, especially for the law on information security that came out, and it also defined organizations that must adhere to this law. Then also we have risks that customers face, especially with new ransomware, which we have witnessed last year. What kind of impact can ransomware strike do in a community? And there's also sometimes a lack of process, no escalation plan. We go, let's say, an ad hoc approach is used instead of, let's say, defining some sort of escalation plan or incident response plan. And we at the SRC bring to the table, to address these challenges, a dedicated team with the know-how and a lot of experience. We are one of the largest integrators in Slovenia and have a pretty strong team in regards both to systems, connectivity, security. And we can also provide, as an external entity, some sort of a mediator to a customer, because the usually customers have several teams that must communicate with each other to achieve a goal. And we have seen that we can, as an external entity, provide some sort of mediation to these groups and also to provide some sort of, let's say, momentum to such projects. And we also have standardized use cases. We have use cases that we know work, that are effective, that we can get quick return, and we can do much very, very quickly. And CSIS, as our specialized partner, who works on a very large scale in Europe, has a large knowledge base, provides specialized tools, especially for forensics and incident response, has relevant threat intelligence, because not all threat intelligence is relevant, and I'm sure Christian will explain a lot about that later on. Okay, so basically this is a flowchart of how we do things. On the left-hand side, we have the customer, who with its sensors, who provide raw data, network flows from security devices, system events, and application device, are normalized and analyzed in an on-premise SIM. These alerts are then forwarded to the SRC SOC, who does the monitoring and incident detection. And it is then decided if this alert is either a false positive, so it does not pose a threat, so it's then tuned. It's either true positive, so basically we decide this is an alert and we should do something about it and maybe treat it as an incident, or also detect this as a false negative. So basically we have not found anything and we need to go back to the drawing board and fix that so that we can detect it in the future. And so basically we either trigger an incident from SRC, or if the incident is too large or exceeds our expertise, we involve our partner CSIS from Denmark. And we had an incident already that we had to do together, and it was an incident in a Slovenian healthcare institution last year, where we detected an emotet infection, and we were able to pinpoint it on the vector and the type of infection pretty quickly. So I will now forward the presentation to Christian.
Hi, my name is Christian and I'm from CSIS. And let me just put up the slide there. Oh, good. So I'm Christian, I'm from CSIS, and I have like kind of a multi-purpose role. So I'm doing consultancy, analysis, incident response, and pre-sales, and actually I'm also a product owner. So I'm a little bit of everything guy. So I'm going to go through three things. So I'm going to quickly introduce our company for those of you who don't know about us, kind of the nature of incident response and what is incident response. And then I'm going to actually explain the CSIS and SRC case study in terms of what was just explained. So that's pretty nice. So quickly, we were founded in 2003. We're 100% employee owned. We have a lot of different employees from around the world because it's really hard to find specialists. So 25 different countries. We're 100% focused on fighting cybercrime, which means that we do everything within cybercrime. Threat intel, reverse engineering, incident response, and MDR. And we're accredited by Gartner for threat intel and MDR as well. We do 24/7 support, and we're known for being very innovative in our security products. So basically, what is new and how should we approach it? Then we also have our own cybercrime conference in Copenhagen once every year. So we had some talks with Gartner, and in terms of what we're good at, we differentiate ourselves because we do our own threat intel. is, of course, is very specific to not necessarily only, but how we started was the UK banks. As I told before, MDR skills, reverse engineering, forensics, we're software independent, so basically we take all types of products in. We have our own incident response tool, and you can use, I don't know if anybody knows what it is, but multi-secret transforms threat intel. We also have some GDPR tracking in our portal, which is our incident management portal. And then we have a lot of add-on modules for different types of threat intel depending on what you want. So for example, we have a sinkhole monitor where we monitor IP addresses, public IP addresses of different companies. So if they're hit by an infection, we can then tell them, hey, you should probably look at this machine, or you probably have a Emotet infection or a TrickBot. Yeah. So what is an incident and how do you handle it? So this is usually how it looks, or it can look. We had a POC with the customer on a curator for a month, and this is the alert fatigue that you get sometimes. This is where our SRC is going to help you a lot. It's figuring out in all this noise, what should you look at and what shouldn't you look at? And then they're going to do a lot of the analysis with our help in some cases, not in all cases. So to formalize that a little bit, you have all these different sensors that they talked about. And then the SIM is what SRC is going to manage with the use cases. We're going to enrich this with some threat intel, our threat intel. And then we have our own security analytics center where in terms of if it should be investigated further or escalated, they help us. And then we also enrich that with stuff from the darknet or some of our different add-on modules, depending on what is needed. So we call this is the governance model overall, that this is the box we work within. So to look a little bit at incident response, this is not an easy thing in general. So SRC is going to help you to kind of, prepare for all of this. What should you look at? What shouldn't you look at? Do you have any escalation procedures in place? Then we come to the identification where we kind of do that both with our SRC and sometimes without to identify all the systems that are compromised. It might just be a single system, but it's really, really important to figure out because in many cases, 54% of the machines that are compromised have malware on them. So there might be a lot of machines that are compromised but don't have malware on them. And it's really important because if you guys start restoring, and we've seen that people jump directly to remediation or eradication or containment without really knowing the nature of what the malware does, then if you start restoring at the wrong point from your backup, then you will just get hit by, for example, ransomware 2 weeks or 2 months later. So this is where we come in to actually figure out exactly what happened. And then from all this information we got, we then start containing so you don't get reinfected. We block all these, you call it indicators of compromise, which can be IPs, domains, hashes, it can be many things. Then help rebuild systems, password resets, give you best practice on which kind of approach you should take. Recover all of the systems, so potentially recover from backup, so you guys come up and running as quickly as possible and don't get reinfected. And then have lessons learned where we actually evaluate on this process and kind of give you what should you do to avoid this from happening next time. So the last thing is I'm going to go through a case study. And as I talked about before, it's really important to know what kind of artifacts are left on the machine. What should we kind of take care of? How does this malware propagate? Is it a worm that does it over the network automatically and just spreads? A great example is actually Emotet. It just spreads over the network and continues to do that. So if you don't get rid of all of it, it will just continue to propagate. Any users that are potentially compromised, machines, systems, it could be a lot of stuff. This is just a small list. And this is where we come in mostly with our SRC tool. And this is a forensics tool. So basically, when you do a crime investigation in the real world, it would be the same. It's just digital forensics instead. So it's an executable you run on the machine, and it collects a lot of different artifacts. If we do a full collection, around 2% of the data on the machine, that tells us 99% of what has happened. And for you guys who are a little bit more technical, it's like event logs, registry databases. We do a PCAP dump of 5 minutes, a lot of different stuff. We do a hash of the entire machine. So you then run this tool on the machine, and this is taken from the use case we had together with the Emotet infection, which is a banking Trojan. After you run the tool on the machine, you get this reports where you can actually see that it's this PC on this domain. In this case, it's not on a domain. You can see which IP it has. You can see the criticality, and the criticality is from the threat intel that we actually enrich the report with. So all IPs and domains and stuff we look up in our own threat feed, and then we actually tell you guys, okay, this is really bad. So you actually have on the left-hand side all the known bad hashes, potentially malware droppers, and this is from both generic and kind of automated rules that we have made and we've seen the last 10 years. So in this case, you can see that the investigator comment was that it was infected with Emotet, and somebody opened a doc document which had an encoded Visual Basic script that downloaded some PowerShell and executed that. So we can already, to give an example of the report, we can actually already see from a hash that was on the machine that Emotet was actually, it was in fact Emotet. So we can actually see that really quickly. But now we don't have all the IOCs we need to actually contain this. So this is where we do a lot of forensics analysis and come to that point. So SRC writes us and says, we have seen some IOC that this was potentially Emotet. Okay, please do a deep dive forensics investigation and find out what happened. So we have then the SRC report and the analysis. So looking further into that, we then have all the different IOCs you can see. So we know that it was something called payment advice node.doc. We know there was a lot of other executables, the one we saw before, the smooth methods.exit. And then we actually have the entire PowerShell script in the bottom that is encoded and obfuscated. And if we deobfuscate that, we can then get the IPs/domains that we need to actually contain this malware so it doesn't spread anymore or reinfects the machine. So what we do in the end is then, of course, as you saw, we have this ticketing system where we put the SRC report in, and potentially there could be more metadata. There could be files that we have fetched and put into it. There could be more text on what is the nature of the incident, how should you approach it. So recommendations, and we update the criticality level. It might be a false positive, so it might just be low or informational. And then all this information actually comes into a gathered report where you can kind of have lessons learned and risk mapping, all the stuff we talked about in the incident response processes. So you have a full audit trail of this, and we also have a GDPR module where you can actually start with 72 hours if you need that. Last but not least, I just want to say that security is not a state, so it's not that you do a project and then you're just done. It's a process, because the threat landscape just changes all the time. New features to operating systems, antivirus tools, attacker techniques, and everything. So this is definitely why you need the combination of SRC and CSIS. Thank you.
Okay, Simon, you usually have something to say about everything and anything. So please, I'm waiting for your further explanation or for any question for Christian.
Oh, I haven't got anything prepared right now, but I can think of something. So, Christian, like you said, how do you do the malware? How do you decode all of that malware? That's I think that's a very good story. So
in general, when you want to deobfuscate it or just deobfuscate it, it's kind of a simple process, because basically what they have done is they just renamed all the stuff so it looks very weird. And so we have some malware reversers. I mean, I can also do it, but it just takes me a little longer. This was a very simple example. It could be a really, really large script. And then when we deobfuscate that, we then can see where it's actually downloading the malware from. And that's really the interesting part.
Yeah, and like I remember, you also put all of the malware that you detect, basically the URLs and the domains, into your threat intelligence, which other customers can then use.
Yes, actually also when we're on incident response, for example, when we were on the MERS case 2 years ago, we found some indicators of compromise that were really, really interesting for a lot of people, because then they could actually search their infrastructure through from these specific IOCs. So yeah, we do actually put that in. All of the threat intel we get from IR and from forensics cases, we put that into our threat intel feed so that you can benefit from it.
So that's what we meant with relevant threat intelligence from real incidents.
Definitely. I mean, we also do find a lot of stuff that is not necessarily from IR cases, but it's just from our really good team in Scannable that is only doing that. So they're only finding different campaigns and what is actually relevant right now. And we also use actually a lot of passive DNS to see that, you know, let's say an IP was malicious half a year ago, might not be that relevant right now because someone else bought it. So we actually use that to see if the threat intel we have currently is relevant. So that's also a really interesting factor. Yeah.
Can you also say what kind of incidents have you responded to lately?
Yeah, a lot of ransomware. I've actually had 2 cases the last 1 month. So we had a really interesting case with a Danish company that had a department in US. And what we typically see, how it starts, is that someone has something open to the internet. In this case, it was a Windows server that had remote desktop open. So we started the incident because they had ransomware. And after we actually were in contact with or our customer was in contact with the FBI, and they said to us that there was actually an account leaked with username, password, an IP, and a port. In this case, it was remote desktop protocol. And so they started, I think it was around 2 weeks before, where they logged in and just started poking around, figuring out the infrastructure. And then around, I think it was 8-9 days after, they started dumping all the different credentials on machines. So it seems like they were actually exfiltrating data. And at the end, they just pushed ransomware to everything from the domain controllers. But in general, we've seen only ransomware the last 3 months, I think. We've not seen any small incidents. Actually, ever since February, we've had like so many incidents, it's crazy. Like I would say 1.5 to 2 a week. So it's really escalated.
That's a lot.
I mean, and then another case would be that it's also ransomware, and it's we actually found the guy who did it specifically because he left some browser history on one of the machines, like a portable Firefox. And one of our reversers actually managed to reverse the ransomware and kind of tie together the data again so they can come up and running again. Because what they did, as I remember, they took the first, I think it was 100 meg of the disk. So with all the, what do you call it, important file information or disk information. So he actually tied that together manually and got the data back to the customer. So we ended up restoring them, getting them back to normal, and we actually figured out specifically the person who actually did it, which is a really good story as well.
Great.
Yeah, I think I mean, they told us that if it hadn't been for us, they wouldn't have had a company today. So that was a really good story, I think. Really happy to help them.
All right.
That's
Christian, CSIS is specialized in security services.
Yes.
And this managed services in IT industry have been around for a few decades in a form of network operations center running support services, etc. As for the security, managed detection and response services is a sort of a counterpart in the field of security as well. So with all these tools in place and software you have been developing, how do you see the customer acceptance of the MDR services worldwide, and why in some cases the task of service onboarding is so hard?
It's actually kind of what was mentioned in the beginning. I think that most people come from a perspective where the most important part is that everything is working operationally. So they can't see the business case for security. I think that's definitely the biggest part. So it's really hard to convince people to buy something that they won't get any profit out of. So people are definitely getting more and more what do you call it? They're accepting it more and more that it's a part of it, especially after GDPR. But what we see mostly is that when people get hit by incidents and then they lose 100, 200, 600 million, then suddenly they want to invest in it. And I think that's definitely the wrong way of thinking. But again, it's from their perspective, there's no business case in it. But from our perspective, we know there's a business case in it. I think that was the main point. I would say that that's really hard, but we're really seeing that customers are definitely more accepted towards it.
So you're saying that awareness, be it common sense or GDPR related, is one thing. So it is helpful if the customers do get attacked. In that case, they will be seeing business case. Is that what you're saying sometimes?
That's not really how we want to do things. We want to be more proactive. And what they always say is that, so we're never going to get hit. It's never going to be us. But from all the different statistics on cyber attacks, it's just a matter of time. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So just doing like the smallest ABC security things is better than doing nothing. As I always say, something is better than nothing. But of course, I think then they start this whole project having an internal SOC, and they figure out what a huge project it is. Like for example, Mitra is a really known framework for mapping kind of risks and attacks, let's say attacks. And they start by looking at this huge table, and they're like, where should we start? We don't have the expertise to do it. And this is where I think the value of MDR comes in, because this is what we do like every day, and we live and breathe it, and we love it. And I know that you guys do as well. So I mean, that's why I think it's really valuable to have some MDR if you don't have a specialized team in-house to actually do it.
So prevention is a must. That's a fact. And MDR is helping to limit the scope of future attacks when they happen as well. So it's not just about handling incidents. So it's also to raise the bar how hard we are becoming, how hard a target we become in the future. This is also, this might also be a conclusion that SRC and CSIS will continue to invest in security, will continue to invest in the processes, which will allow us to handle all sorts of incident in the future in a costly manner, and of course with some intelligence in place to keep the business on.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Yeah.
It is not only prevention in that sense, so it can also be proactive. That we write you guys that we found one of your customers' credentials leaked, so you should probably reset this password. Because from the previous example I had, that was leaked credentials and they just had immediate access. In this case, you could just reset the user's password and immediately remediate it. And I think also why they need someone like you is to actually, let's say that something actually happens and they come in, then you immediately know, and then starting the incident response escalation process from day 1 or from day 6 has a huge difference. So it might be the difference between 2 million and 200 million. I think that's also a really valid point.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the audience? Okay, with this being said, I'm saying thank you to all attendees for their participation, and especially to both presenters for an educative and interesting lecture. So thank you again, and we hear each other in a few weeks' time on yet another webinar from SRC. Goodbye.
Goodbye.